Well, good morning, brethren. It's good to be back up here with you again on another lovely Sabbath day. Now, my presentation today is entitled The Geography of the Holy Land, Part 1. Now, this is something that I've been planning for and thinking about long before my most recent trip to Israel. I've kind of wanted to do a series to help with better appreciating the geographical background of the stories of the Bible, excuse me, and better appreciating the land that God himself chose for his chosen people. Now, I originally planned to do this series in two parts, covering the north and then the south of the Holy Land, including the areas in Jordan on the eastern side that were part of ancient Israel. But in preparing this first part and seeing just how much material there was, I've decided to expand that even further. I'll instead be covering this over 5 parts. So today we're going to look at northern Israel. Next time we'll look at central Israel. Then in part 3 we'll explore southern Israel. In part 4 we'll do a detailed dive into looking at the great city of Jerusalem. And then we'll finish the series with a look at Jordan, which much was part of ancient Israel. Now, Israel is an amazing country that I've had the privilege of visiting 3 times so far. Now, my first trip there was 3 days after a Feast of Tabernacles in England back in 1999 at the end of a 5-week trip to Europe with my good friend Trevor Christie and another friend just visible in the top left photo. My second trip was for a week on my own during the Feast of Unleavened Bread back in 2008. And my most recent trip was in June this year, where we were in Israel and Jordan for a whole month. Now, for the middle 2 weeks, we had 7 Aussies and 7 Americans for a trip that was organised by Jeff Robinson's Ambassador College friend Joe Ross, who's third from the right in the bottom photo with the hat and the blue shirt on. Now, he organised 11 days for us in Israel, plus an additional 5 days where we participated on an archaeological dig at Tel Burna, believed to be the biblical city of Libnah. Now, our Aussie group had an additional 3 days beforehand, and I went even earlier for another 4 days. And after our tour to Israel, our Aussie group then did a week touring through Jordan. Now, we had an amazing blessed run with the weather. Now, I was really dreading super hot summer days, which were predicted, but we got when we got there, it was about 5 to 10 degrees cooler than the usual temperatures for that time of year, with the exception of the time that we were near the Dead Sea. Now, apart from a couple of overcast days after the Americans arrived, we had clear skies for the rest of the month that we were there. Now, in summary, the trip was exhausting, expensive, but very well worth it. A real trip of a lifetime. Now, there's nothing quite like visiting the places where these events actually took place to help with bringing the stories of the Bible to life. So in this series, I hope to do my best to help bring to life those stories and events with this virtual tour of the Holy Land. Just give me a second. Now, here's a map that Jeff Robinson produced, noting all of the places that we visited on our most recent tour, which was quite comprehensive, except for much of the West Bank, which I am keen to see on a future trip. Now, around half the photos I'll be showing in this series are those of my own, but they'll also be supplemented with photos from other sources. Now, a major source are the excellent disc series by Todd Bolland, who sells them on his BiblePlaces.com website. Now, on the same site, he sells one of the best Bible atlases going around, and that's Bill Schlegel's Satellite Bible Atlas. Now, a lot of the maps in this series come from that atlas. Now, Bill also has a YouTube channel called the Satellite Bible Atlas with some great videos on the different regions of Israel, which I've taken a lot of inspiration from and used screen captures from in the series. Now, another excellent book that I recommend is this one that covers all the major sites in Israel by Todd Fink, with photos and historical background of each of the sites. Now, he's also got a terrific website and YouTube channel with lots of great videos shot on location with high-res drone footage for most of the many biblical sites. Now, Todd also does 2-week tours of Israel. Now, his tours and those of American archaeologist Joel Kramer cover sites in the West Bank that are dripping in Bible history that usually get missed by most tour groups, and that includes our own UCG feast tours, which miss those sites as well. Now, Todd's tours cover sites in the West Bank such as Shechem, Shiloh, Bethel, Ai, Bethlehem and Hebron. Now, Joel Kramer's tours also go to Samaria but don't go to Shiloh. Now, from a geographical point of view, the very first thing we need to understand is why God chose the land of Israel to give to Abraham's descendants through Jacob. Now, the land of Israel is situated near the intersection of the three great continents of Africa, Asia and Europe. Now, it sits in a narrow tract of fertile land in between the two great ancient regions and empires of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Now, Ezekiel 5:5, God said about Jerusalem that I have set her in the centre of the nations with countries around her. Now, Israel as a nation was meant to draw and attract the Gentiles to God as they saw and observed what God was doing through Israel. Now, this sinks in well with what Jesus said to his followers in the Sermon on the Mount when he says that we are to be a light to the world and a city that is set on a hill. And we are to be a visible display of what it is like to live God's way. Now, Israel is a relatively small country. Now, the term from Dan to Beersheba is used a number of times to refer to the whole length of the nation. Now, the distance between Dan in the north and Beersheba in the south is about 280 kilometres, which is about the same distance driving from Noosa at the top of the Sunshine Coast to Coolangatta at the bottom of the Gold Coast here in Queensland. Now, it's a lot narrower going east to west. Now, from Tel Aviv on the coast to the Jordan River is only about 75 kilometres, or about the distance between Brisbane and the Gold Coast. Now, the driving distance from Dan in the very north to Eilat, way down in the Gulf of Aqaba, at the bottom of modern Israel, is about 468 kilometres, which is a similar distance to drive from Noosa down to Grafton. Now, just before Israel entered the Promised Land, this is how he described the land in Deuteronomy 8 and verses 7 to 10. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs that flow out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of the hills you can dig copper. Now, the land that God brought Israel into was not a desert, and there's especially two of the much greener north of Israel. Now, although some parts of the land are rocky desert, most of the land is a good land, consisting of valleys, plains, hills, and mountains. Now, it is a relatively small land characterised by much geographic and regional variety. Now, Israel is a land of great variety of landscapes, from beautiful Mediterranean coastlines to forested mountains to desert areas. Now, Jerusalem, Haifa and Tel Aviv will receive approximately 500 millimetres or 20 inches of rain per year. Now, that's about half the rainfall that Brisbane receives here. Now, as you go further south and east of Jerusalem, that average rainfall drops off quite severely. Now, God told them that he was going to give them large and beautiful cities which they did not build, houses full of good things which they did not fill, hewn out wells which they did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees which they did not plant. Now, the intent was not to destroy the land, but to inherit and take over. Now, the sins of the Canaanites were full, and God intended as a result of those sins to drive them out. Now, in Deuteronomy 11, verses 11 to 12, we read, "The land which you cross over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water from the rain of heaven, a land for which the Lord your God cares. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it." Now, God has a special concern and interest in the land that he gave to ancient Israel. His eyes are always on it, even today with the recent horrible attacks by Hamas. Now, Israel is a land of great variety of landscapes. Now, running along the Mediterranean coast is the coastal plain. Now, the coastal plain south of Haifa is subdivided into two plains. The coastal plain south of Haifa the northern half is the Sharon plain, and the southern half is the Philistine plain or Philistia. Now, moving inland and running north to south through the centre of the country is the Central Highlands. Now, most of this area is between 2,000 and 3,000 feet in elevation, or up to 1,000 metres above sea level. Now, the Central Highlands is likewise divided into two parts. Now, the northern half is the region of Samaria. Now, from that region, the Carmel Range juts out northwest from it all the way to the coast near Haifa. Now, the southern half of the Central Highlands is what's called the Judean Highlands. Now, in between the coastal plain and the Judean Highlands is the area known as the Shephelah, or the Judean foothills, which are cut by 5 valleys. Now, Jerusalem sits on the watershed of the Judean mountains. Now, most of the coastal moisture doesn't make it past the ridgeline of the watershed, so it is much drier on the eastern side of the Judean Highlands as the mountains descend sharply towards the Dead Sea. Now, that area of Judea southeast of Jerusalem is known as the Judean wilderness. Now, south of the Central Highlands is the area that is known as the Negev, a word that means south, and is much more semi-arid and an arid region compared to the rest of Israel. Now, going further east is the Rift Valley, through which the Jordan River passes through. Now, the deepest part of the Rift Valley is over 1,300 feet or 400 metres below sea level, where the Dead Sea is today. Now, the Sea of Galilee further north is half that depth at 200 metres below sea level. Now, that entire Jordan River Valley from Tel Dan, near the streams that are the source of the Jordan River, right down to the Dead Sea at some time in the past sank below sea level. Now, going further east is the Trans-Jordan Plateau. Now, from 1,000 feet below sea level in the Jordan Rift Valley, you have to ascend nearly a mile or 5,000 feet for about 1,500 metres to reach that plateau. Now, it's a bit like climbing up to Toowoomba on the Darling Downs Plateau, but twice that height. Now, in ancient times, much of this plateau was allotted to the tribes of Manasseh, Gad and Reuben, with the nations of Moab and Ammon in the part south of it, south of the Arnon River. Now, in the very far north is the highest mountain in Israel, Mount Hermon, which is a little over 9,000 feet or 22,800 metres in elevation, which is about 600 metres higher than Australia's tallest mountain, Mount Kosciuszko. Now, Mount Hermon overlooks Tel Dan near the source of the Jordan River. Now, in between the Central Highlands and the Galilee further north is the Jezreel Valley, which is shaped like an arrow. Now, to the north of the Jezreel Valley is the area that is known as the Galilee, which is an elevated and in some places mountainous area. And west of the Galilee is the northern coastal plain, which is known in the Bible as the Plain of Asher. Now, going through the land from north to south are 4 very important ancient trade routes. Now, the most important is the Via Maris, or the Way of the Sea, noted here as the coastal highway, which linked Egypt with Assyria and Babylon in the area of Mesopotamia. Now, it branched off the King's Highway and passed by the Sea of Galilee near Capernaum, and then went through the Carmel Range via the Aruna Pass near Megiddo before going along the coast. Now, the other major international road was the King's Highway, which went south along the eastern side of the Jordan on the Trans-Jordan Plateau. Now, the Road of the Patriarchs, or the Ridge Route, split off from the Via Maris in the Jezreel Valley and went south along the ridges of the hill country of Samaria and Judah. Now it passed many important cities like Shechem, Bethel, Jerusalem and Hebron before dropping in altitude to reach Beersheba. Now the last major route was the Rift or Jordan Valley route. Now most travellers to Jerusalem from the Galilee region would tend to go south along this road before ascending up to Jerusalem after they got to Jericho. Now they could also go via the ridge route, and we see Jesus choosing to go this way when he chose to go through Samaria. Now control of these particular trade routes, especially the Via Maris and the King's Highway, was vital to the prosperity of ancient Israel. Now let's take a look at the land that was allotted to each of the tribes of Israel. Now the land north of Samaria and west of the Jordan River was divided between 4 tribes. Now Asher and Naphtali were the youngest sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, the handmaids of Rachel and Leah. Now Zebulun and Issachar were the 2 younger sons of Leah. Now Asher received the beautiful coastal plain called the Plain of Asher, shown in purple here, plus a little bit of the western Galilee. Now the bulk of the northern Galilee, which included the Hula Valley and much of the Sea of Galilee, went to Naphtali. Now most of the lower or southern Galilee, including Nazareth, went to the tribe of Zebulun, and the Jezreel Valley went to Issachar, except for the area around Bethshan, close to the Jordan River. Now the tribe that was to receive the birthright or double share of the inheritance was the tribe of Joseph. Now you won't see the name of Joseph on maps showing the tribal allotments, but you do see his sons' names, his oldest son Manasseh and his youngest son Ephraim. Now Ephraim received a similar size inheritance as the rest, but Manasseh received the largest share of land by far, including large portions on both sides of the Jordan River. Now Ephraim received the lower half of the region of Samaria, which included the important cities of Shiloh, where the tabernacle was during the time of Judges, and Bethel, where Jeroboam later set up a golden calf. Now Manasseh received the northern half of Samaria, plus Bethshan, and most of the plain of Sharon. Manasseh also received the area of Bashan to the east of the Sea of Galilee, that's today's Golan Heights, and much of the Gilead region east of Bethshan. Now the remainder of the Transjordan Plateau north of the Hizbon River was given to Gad, the oldest son of Leah's handmaid. Now Dan was the oldest son of Rachel's handmaid. Now Dan had an inheritance that included the coast around Joppa and today's Tel Aviv, as well as the Ajalon and Sorek valleys. Now Dan's most famous individual, Samson, lived in that Sorek valley, west of Jerusalem. Now due to problems with the Philistines, a portion of the Danites relocated all the way up to the very north, near the source of the Jordan, near Mount Hermon. Now in the south, Judah had a large portion that took in most of the Judean highlands, the Judean wilderness, much of the Shephelah, and also the southern coastal plain where the Philistines lived. Now today's Gaza Strip was actually a part of Judah's inheritance. Now a narrow strip of land in between Judah's and Ephraim's inheritance was split between Dan in the west and Benjamin in the east. Now Benjamin's inheritance went from Kirjath Jearim and took in places such as Gibeon, Saul's hometown Ramah, King Saul's capital Gibeah, and extended down towards Jericho. Now at its southern end was Israel's and Judea's capital city of Jerusalem. Now Benjamin was the youngest son of Jacob's favourite wife Rachel. Now Benjamin's inheritance borders with that of Rachel's other son Joseph, but its history as a tribe would be more connected to Judah in the south, especially after the nation split into 2 kingdoms. Now Simeon's inheritance was based around Beersheba in the Negev. Now there are indications that much of this smaller tribe of Simeon moved to the north after the split during the time of Rehoboam. Now, on the opposite side of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea was the inheritance of Leah's oldest son Reuben, which lies between the Hizbon and Arnon rivers, north of the nations of Moab and Ammon. Now, 10 tribes, plus the 2 half-tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, received land inheritances. Now, the one tribe that didn't receive a land inheritance was the priestly tribe of Levi, from which came the priests. Now, as a check and balance to that power and receipt of the nation's tithes, they were given cities across the whole nation from where they were charged with teaching the law to those in each of the tribes. Now, there were 48 cities in total, approximately 4 per tribe, allocated to the Levites. Now, when we were in Israel in June, we participated in an archaeological dig at one of those cities, the city of Libnah in Judah. Now, some of the other interesting Levitical cities include Hebron, Anatoth, where Jeremiah came from, Gibeon, Gezer, Beth Shemesh, and Shechem. Now, additionally, there were 6 cities shown on the map on the right, which were cities of refuge that provided sanctuary for someone who had accidentally killed someone or manslaughter. Now, the shaded area in the middle of this map is the area that's today called the West Bank. Now, this area was captured from Jordan by Israel during the Six-Day War of 1967. Now, while Israel had overall control within the West Bank, while Israel has overall control, certain parts within the West Bank, designated Area A, are off limits to Israelis, as noted on the sign on the right. Now, places such as Shechem, Samaria, Bethlehem and Hebron, which are all dripping in Bible history, are all Area A. Now, tourists can visit these places, but not with a car registered in Israel. Now, your options to go to these places include the few organised tours that go there, or you can hire a Palestinian tour guide to take you to them, which is a fairly expensive option that I couldn't afford this time around, but it's something I plan to do on a future trip. Now, tourism is welcomed by the Palestinians who desire it to boost their local economy. Now, places within the West Bank that Israelis can drive to include Jericho, Qumran, the Herodian, and Shiloh. Now, the orange part in the bottom left of the map is the Gaza Strip. Now, there was a similar arrangement of control between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, like in the West Bank, until 2007, when Hamas won the last elections that were held there. Now, Israel pulled out all remaining Jews out of Gaza and ceded all control to Hamas. Now, since that time, Israel and Egypt have imposed a full blockade preventing the free flow of people and goods, while Hamas continue with their threats of violence.